Great. Good morning. Thank you so much for coming to our pre-assessment workshop to help prepare you for what's coming up in the fall. Global Context is up for assessment, and it is one of our new categories, so we're kind of excited to see how things are going. I'm Laura Palms. I'm the director of Mason Core, and I have my um, team with me, and I will just have everybody introduce themselves real quick. Trisha, you want to kick us off?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Trisha Wilson. I'm the Mason Core Curriculum Specialist. So a lot of the communications that you'll receive from Mason Core come from me and Laura. But if you need anything, you're always welcome to let us know. The email is Mason Core without the E at gmu.edu. But that is me. I'll kick it off to Tom.
Good morning, everybody. It's good to see everyone. I'm Tom Polk. I direct writing across the curriculum here at George Mason and work out of the Stern Center, where I get to have great conversations with everyone like you about assignments and teaching. And I'll pass it off to Chris.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Chris Lee, and I work in the Office of Institutional Effectiveness and Planning. And my role is Associate Director of Institutional Effectiveness, and my primary role is to support Mason Core Assessment. I am just so grateful to be a part of this wonderful team, and we look forward to our time with you here today. You will be hearing from me periodically throughout the upcoming year, but namely in the fall when we are preparing for data collection. And we will also host a submission workshop in the fall as well. And we'll talk about those details towards the end of today's session. But we look forward to this time together, learning and getting to know one another. So thank you, everyone, for being here.
And then Rachel, do you want to say hello?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel Yo. I'm Assistant Director in the Stern Center for Teaching and Learning. And I'm very excited to be in this workshop today. It seems like it's been a long time, but also a very short time with Global Context. So I'm really excited to have these conversations and join you today.
It's kind of full circle. The initial workshops to get everybody into the category, which everybody did a masterful job. So I'm hoping things are hanging up. So if you guys could in the chat, put your who you are, and then what course you teach most regularly, and whether or not you have an assignment prompt or an exam question that you brought with you that you can use for today's discussion. And if you don't, that's fine. We have some things you can work on, or we'll put you into small groups. Okay. There we go. All these names are looking familiar because we saw you in all the other workshops, so it's good to see everybody again. Yay. Perfect. Perfect. All right. We are looking good. And some of you may be program directors, so you may not have an assignment, but you will get the general idea when you're working with your faculty of what we might need you to help with. So that's good. Okay. All right. I think we can go ahead and get started. Thanks, everybody.
Okay. So to start us off, I will give a brief overview of what you can expect in today's session. So to start with the Mason Core assessment, understanding what the purpose of the Mason Core assessment process is, we'll go over that. And then we'll spend some time specifically digging into the global context learning outcomes, as well as the rubric that will be used for assessment. The majority of our time will be spent looking at, we've asked all of you to, if you are able to bring an assignment, so that we have the opportunity today to look at the assignment as it relates to these learning outcomes and to think about what it means to align the assignment with the learning outcomes to give students opportunity to demonstrate learning. And then finally, we'll talk about next steps for selecting the assignment, as well as some supports that we have in place to support our faculty with the Mason Core assessment process.
So a little bit of a distinction between grading and assessment. I think sometimes we get a little bit twisted up between the two. So what we're doing with this is assessment. So we are looking at how well the category overall is functioning, whereas course grading focuses on individual student performance. And we will be collecting student artifacts, so student work, but we're not looking at whether or not they are passing or failing the assignment. We're looking at if they are meeting the categories, learning outcomes that are assigned to that particular assignment. So slight difference there. So grading, of course, is based on specific student work, so assignments and exams, whereas assessment is going to be more comprehensive. We're looking at assignments across the category. We're looking at assignments across the learning outcomes to make sure that our students are attaining what we need them to attain. We usually set a goal of about, I think, Chris, about 75 or 80%. Is it 80%?
Our benchmark metric is currently 70%, but
70%,
it does,
yeah.
it can vary based on category and prior findings, but yes, 70%.
Right. So we'd like 70% of our students to hit benchmark, and benchmark basically is, did you meet the learning outcome or did you not? We don't look too much at the gradation of that. It's either a yes or no kind of thing. And so it's a much more comprehensive evaluation. We get an idea of where students are going, and there's several questions that we are answering within that. It's the assignment set up so students can actually meet the goal of the category, meet the learning outcome, and then what level are they at when they are providing their student work? So course grading then results in a letter grade, and I'm sure we're getting to the point of the semester where you get those emails that say, I'd just like another half a point, even though they've had 1,000 points to work with all semester long. The results of assessment are really insights. So sometimes it's that students are not maybe performing on an outcome, and we need to do some more things to help out with that. And sometimes this is going to be surprising to you. We maybe didn't do the greatest job writing the outcome, and it needs to be refined. And this tells us what is going on there so that we can make sure that it's something that's useful for our students, and it's also something that faculty can actually work with when they're teaching in these courses. So course grading then it involves individual accountability, the students accountable for their own work. Whereas with assessment, it's more a collective approach. We don't look at any one department or any one course. We look across. We de-identify all the data. We don't, look at anybody's teaching skills. We're just looking at how well students are performing on the assignments they've been given in the categories courses. And then that allows us to do a lot more curricular evaluation.
Great. Thank you, Laura. That was a great summary. I'm going to talk now about the outcomes of the Mason Core assessment. So here you see 3 different outcomes that we have, and these outcomes are at the program level. So we're looking at outcomes not at the category level, the learning outcomes that you may be familiar with, but these are outcomes that are for the program level for Mason Core assessment. So there are 3 things. The first is we want to understand if students are demonstrating achievement of learning in the cycle, and that metric that Laura mentioned, that's what we're looking at here. We want to understand how student learning has changed since the last assessment cycle, and this is very important information for us as assessment is, and you may have heard of this in other spaces, is about continuous improvement, right? And so looking at prior findings and comparing that to what we need to do moving forward is very important to this process. And then finally, based on what we've learned, what changes do we need to make moving forward? And so while of course we'd love to be, at a certain metric and knowing that all of our students are, meeting the learning outcomes and that our faculty are able to, utilize the outcomes that are given to them for student success, we know that, our students are changing. There are other factors that are impacting, curricular changes along the way. And so that's why we want to just continuously look at this through the, excuse me, through the assessment process. And so the changes are what is of utmost importance as we look at what are going to be our next steps. And these three outcomes are framed in question format for our reports that are completed after the conclusion of the data collection, analysis, and the findings. So for all of our categories, the questions, the outcome statements that you see here formulate the questions that sort of drive the structure of the reports. And if you are interested, on our website, I'll share towards the end, you can see some of our prior reports that are up there for you to see what that would look like.
Okay, so these are the learning outcomes, which I know for some of you are almost second nature. And so the first learning outcome, I'll just read them to you, and that you can, there's a few issues already happening in these outcomes that we need to address going forward, but we want to see the results of assessment. So the first one is identify and explain, which makes it double-barreled, and that can be problematic sometimes. But so identify and explain how patterns of global connections across nations and/or cultures have shaped societies to create interdependence and inequality. Number two is using a disciplinary lens, so that's your departmental lens, to demonstrate knowledge of how at least one nation and/or culture participates in or is affected by global context. So this is when you can go broad or you can go deep. It just depends on what you want to do with your course. And then we ask students to apply an understanding of their own positionality within a globally interdependent and unequal world to analyze solutions to global problems. And that one is a little trickier because positionality is something that is difficult for students to understand. And so we have extra help there for you on those as well. So that's our learning outcomes. They are new. You may, if you're really new to Mason, you don't know this, but these were the results of the assessment of the previous round of assessment, and they went into effect in 2024. So they haven't been in too long. And we did a lot of workshops around them. So we're kind of hoping that we have a pretty easy assessment on all aspects of doing assessment, but we'll see what happens.
Here, we're sharing the global context rubric for you all, and hopefully you can see that or zoom in a little bit because some of the font is a bit small. So I will kind of highlight some of the points here, but at the very top, it says that this is a rubric to assess student learning, and using the scale that you see here, it's a 3-point scale. And so when the rating is assigned, and this takes place after data collection is completed, that it is a whole number that is assigned. And so again, the metric that we were discussing earlier would be whether or not the outcome meets, and so that's a 2. And when there is insufficient evidence in the artifact, so that would mean if the assignment for some reason would not necessarily be aligned to the stated learning outcome, then it would not be able to be something that's, then they would not be able to rate the artifact. We are sharing this rubric with you so that you can have an idea of what the ratings process will look like, but it's not something that you need to necessarily do with the artifact that you will be submitting, artifacts you'll be submitting in the fall. But we certainly want you to be aware of what this looks like, and happy to discuss further if there are any questions. But essentially, we ended up revising this rubric, I think it was like early in 2025. So we've used it with a couple categories to rate artifacts. And the recent revision, I think it was March 2025, happened because we previously, if you've been a part of Mason Core or Mason Core assessment or rated artifacts in the past, the scale had the terms like benchmark, milestone, capstone. So that may be familiar to you. And one of the, the feedback that we received from the very first round that we've done with the most recent round that we did with IT and QR was that the descriptors in the various learning outcomes felt like more like distinct learning outcomes. And so then it became a little bit challenging with rating like one single artifact. So that's just a little bit of background. And so we ended up revising it, and we think that we've had some more success with it. And so we're just trying to keep things as simple as possible for you all. But again, there's nothing that you need to do on your end. to use the rubric for any purpose other than just knowing that this is the rubric that we use for the ratings. And of course, like down the line, we'd love to have many of you join us for that process as well. But yes, this is the rubric that we use, and it's the rubric that we use really for all of our categories. It's the same consistent rubric. Yes. Okay. So, yes, do we, Laura, feel free to, I think you were about to unmute. Do we have any questions for any of the content that we've shared so far? So that was a lot.
We'll wait the allotted teacher time.
Mm-hmm.
You can unmute and ask, or you can raise your hand.
Yeah, or in the chat is great too. Or maybe you'll have some questions later, which is totally fine. If there's anything that you think of later, we're good with that as well. But
A lot of folks did the initial workshops too, so they're pretty well up on this already. So that's good.
yeah.
I have a question. Yeah, I'm Azin, Criminology Law and Society, and we have a Mason Core course. It's CRIM 405, Law and Justice Around the World, and we offer multiple sections of the course every semester. So I think my first question is, does every instructor provide sample assignments and participate in this process?
They do, which is
Yeah.
why we hope to talk to course coordinators or undergraduate program directors. So even if they're a grad student or an adjunct, we'd like to see what they're doing because we need to have consistency across the core. So we do ask everybody to do it, which is why we do a much bigger, when they get their letters in the fall that say, you're teaching a Mason Core course and your course is under assessment, and we're going to have a meeting on X date. And then we'll send another reminder about how to do it. So we try to keep the process for actually submitting very simple. And Chris will talk a little bit more about that at the end, but we would like to see something. The trick with assessment overall is we have to see something from each course. If we don't get anything at all from your course, then that's going to be an issue. As many sections as we can get to participate is ideal because then we have a better pool.
Yeah, that's great. And then do we assess all learning outcomes or we pick one of them?
You're going to pick one.
One, okay.
You can pick your own. And so the one you're most comfortable with is probably a good choice to make.
Yes,
Hopefully,
that's helpful.
and we've been able to get, in the past, we've let people do that, and we've been able to get a really good broad representation across all the outcomes.
Thank you so much.
Sure. Each instructor can pick their own, unless you if you're a course coordinator or an undergraduate program director and you have a common assignment and you want them to use the common assignment, then you can tell them you want them to. Otherwise, we let them pick. Anybody else? All right. And we will have lots and lots and lots and lots of help posted on the OIEP Mason Core website, so people will know, and we will remind them to death. All right.
Laura, just one more question.
Yeah.
Just to clarify, if you have multiple sections, each instructor can pick and all your sections can pick a different learning outcome.
Yeah.
And, but every section has to pick one.
Right. And as long as you're okay with them picking their own, because you as the department have control over that too. So you can tell people which one you want them to pick if they have one, if there's a common assignment. And some people do use common assignments, some departments don't. If they don't, they can pick whichever one they want, as long as they can be, the trick would be, it obviously needs to map to an outcome, right? So you pick the outcome, then you pick the assignment you think maps to the outcome, and you go from there. Or you look at the assignment and you see which outcome it looks like it goes to best. Either way, but it should map is the idea. That's the hope.
Thank you.
And sometimes an instructor has an assignment that may map to more than one learning outcome, but even in that case, we ask that you select the best one, I guess, for submitting. And that way we can tag it with that particular one, because what we end up doing later is pulling artifacts based on the learning outcome and to have a broad representation across the different courses, but also across, we want all the learning outcomes to be assessed sort of evenly. So yes, as Laura mentioned, we've been able to get a nice broad, sprinkling across the categories. So it's kind of just worked out. We do have sometimes we'll have a category decide even at the category level that they want to focus on a particular outcome, just in case you are in a different category or you end up speaking with another colleague. But we've had some that are like, we're going to do learning outcome 2. And in that case, then everybody submits for learning outcome 2. But if there's no specific directions otherwise, either at the program level or from your department, yes, you are free to pick the one that you feel is best suited, even if you have more than one that's assigned to the particular assignment.
And we will, at the end of the first, so we'll collect for a year. And at the end of the first semester, we do a kind of a quick look and we just make sure we get some decent representation across the learning outcomes. And if we don't, we may have to amend that a little bit for the spring data collection, just so we get enough information on all the categories. But we haven't had to do that yet.
We haven't had to do that.
We've been super lucky with what we've got. It's definitely, then we use the randomized stratified sample to pick the subjects that are the data that's actually looked at in subject matter review. So it's quite a process. And we'd love to have you join us if you're interested in the process. Okay, I think we're looking good. Oh, wait. Next summer. No, we don't really collect in the summer. Summer is such a compacted time period, and it's just really rough to even, I feel like, having done it numerous times, it's rough to just get through the summer, and we may not have the clearest. And we don't have a ton of Mason Core going in the summer either. So we just think fall and spring will give us enough because we get plenty of data points that way. Okay, so I think if we're good, Tom and Rachel will take it away on what we're talking about when we're talking about aligning assignments with learning outcomes for assessment.
Okay, yeah. Well, hello again. So this middle section is really a little bit of information. It might be a refresher for many of you if you've gone through some of these recent workshops for course proposals when this category was being developed, or it might be new. And it's really about kind of setting ourselves up in the work of the classroom to have a really strong assessment of the category, right? And a lot of it hinges around this concept of alignment. So we're going to talk a little bit about alignment, just as a concept, and then move kind of quickly into thinking about assignments and asking ourselves whether they align effectively. Just we have a couple of like sample fictional assignments, and then as I was reviewing in the chat, it seemed like many of you don't have or hadn't brought your own assignments, but we're hoping that you're going to have a chance to kind of either look at your own assignment, or if you can kind of think about something that might fit this category. And as maybe a last sort of ditch effort, maybe one of your, when we put you into peer groups, could share an assignment that you can kind of think about its alignment with this category. So that's kind of a preview of what we're going to do over the next bit of time. So to start, right, what is alignment? Again, this might be a refresher, but it's really just this idea that sort of the core elements of your course are really working together toward sort of a set direction, a set goal, right? That goal is articulated through an outcome, right, for student learning, the term we use most often here. Sometimes if you worked at another institution or another context, you might hear learning objective or learning goal. There's slight nuances between those, but they all are kind of just these ideas of, what are students meant to learn in this course, right? And so that sets the direction, right, for your assignments, your learning activities, the kinds of feedback you might give in a course, all so that you can give your students the best opportunity of really achieving that outcome. And so when we're kind of focused on the different phases of this assessment process for Mason Core, we're really thinking about how are we constructing assignments that are really effective? How are we helping our students achieve that learning? And then how effectively is that outcome actually working? Is that the right thing for us? Is it setting the right direction? And so that's sort of encapsulated, or that relationship is encapsulated on this left-hand slide, simplified version of it. But then on the right, there are a couple of caveats to kind of keep in mind as we start thinking about our semester ahead and the kinds of artifacts that we want to submit for this assessment, right? One is that, this category has what, 3 outcomes. We need one assignment to measure each outcome, right? You can have one, oh, sorry, we need to have at least one assignment, I should say, measure each outcome. You can have one to try and do all 3. It might be a little bit awkward. It can work if you have outcomes that are, complementary, but may not always work so well. But so as I'm saying, you can have one measure more than one, but you need to have at least one assignment measure each outcome. And then the final bullet point you see here is really important for these sort of institutional assessment processes, more so than the activity that you're doing in your own individual classroom, is that the type of assignment that you're asking students to complete to demonstrate their learning is something that's portable, right? That somebody who comes to one of our sessions, to rate student work, is able to review, right? And so that has implications for, oral activities that you might do in a classroom or other types of performances. You have to really think about, how am I going to be able to share this with Chris when she sends me those copious emails, and say, here's what my students have done relative to this outcome, right? And we'll talk more about these as we move forward. Trisha, could you move the slide? Yeah, thanks. And so as we talk about alignment in the Stern Center, and as we talk about it in this Mason Core context, we often ask ourselves, and so we share this with faculty, some core questions about alignment and really, are our assignments aligning in the ways that we hope? And so we're going to spend a fair amount of time with these 5 questions. I'll just kind of read them and maybe make a quick comment or 2, but we'll kind of elaborate as we go. So the first is really, will all students demonstrate their learning, right? Not just some of my students. Are all students going to have to do something to demonstrate what they've learned relative to the outcome I'm trying to measure, right? Will that evidence of their learning be documentable? This is kind of what I was just saying, right? Can you share it, right, with somebody else? Can you observe it in some way, shape, or form beyond just in the classroom in the moment? Is the learning going to be contextual to the course? Or I think maybe another way of saying that, is it going to be significant, right? So that we're not just sort of doing a 1 lecture, small assignment in a course, but that we're dedicating significant effort to learning relative to that assignment, and that it fits, it's organic to the course, right? And then the last 2 is really where we're going to spend most of our time thinking about alignment for today. Will the student work that's going to be a result of my assignment match the verbs of the outcome? And then will the student work address all significant elements of the outcome, which Laura sort of foreshadowed might be a little bit challenging for some of the outcomes that we have in this category. So more on those last 2 points, right? Student achievement should match the verbs, and student achievement should match all parts of the outcome, right? So when you look at these outcomes, outcomes in general begin with a very clear verb that describes some kind of cognitive activity, right, that your students should be undertaking. That verb is very important, right, because it kind of sets the motion or sets the direction of the outcome and, right, the kind of learning your students should be demonstrating, right? And so as an example, we're thinking through the matching, right? If the outcome says describe, right, and your assignment asks them to analyze, there might be a little bit of an issue. Even if analyze is a more complicated or complex sort of activity, your students may or may not actually describe the kinds of things that you want them to describe through this outcome. And so it becomes an assignment that's a little bit hard to assess, at least relative to the outcome that we're interested in. And vice versa, if the outcome says to describe or says to analyze and you're asking students to describe, right, we might not have our abilities to really fully measure whether students are meeting the outcome as we've written it. Organize, different from select and evaluate. These are different kinds of activities, and so we need to be very mindful if we're interested in how students are going to select and evaluate information of some kind. We need to directly prompt that, not maybe substitute it for a different kind of verb like organize, which is, very useful, particularly now in an information overload world. But we want to be sure that we're asking students really to select and evaluate if that's what the outcome is articulating. The second piece that's really important, right, is student achievement really needs to match all parts of the outcome. Right. So we've pulled two of the outcomes from this category and just highlighted parts of them. As I said, Laura was kind of previewing or foreshadowing some of this. And so you can kind of see it a little bit more. We'll talk a little bit about it right now, right? In that first outcome, it begins with two verbs, right? So what we're already setting our students up to do is two different things, right? Identify and explain, right? How patterns of global connections across nations and or cultures, right, have shaped society to create interdependence and inequality. Every time we add an and, we're adding more work, right? We're adding more things that students need to do. We're adding more things that we need to be mindful of when we're designing our assignments and then when we're assessing that work, right? So when you or when your colleagues are designing an assignment that's meant to help students learn, relative to this outcome, you need to really be mindful of how are all of these pieces coming into that assignment. And then the third outcome that we've pulled, and again, I know this one is a challenging one for many faculty, right? We're asking, again, students to do kind of two different activities. They're applying an understanding of their own positionality, right, within a global, interdependent, and unequal world to analyze solutions, right? So our students, as they're working on the assignments that we're asking students to do in these courses, both applying that understanding as they analyze, right? So it's two things going on. And we need to be really mindful as we design our assignments that we're giving them an opportunity to do both of those things. Rachel, did you want to add anything about these outcomes or things that we've mentioned so far?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. No, I think this was great. I just want to emphasize that, all of this is not just specific to the Mason core. When we're talking about the outcomes, talking about the mapping, these are really just transferable topics and skills for all of our, outcomes and things for classes, whether they're in the core or not. So, having that context really, I hope makes the relevance even greater for this. And I know, we'll probably talk a little bit more about positionality in a little bit, but I do want to acknowledge the comment in the chat that this is hard. This is something that we want to think very critically about, not only how we help students practice this, but how we even think about what does this mean in our discipline, because we're not asking students about, sensitive identities or just themselves or just their feelings or something like that, but that intellectual move. And so I just want to emphasize, what Tom was just talking about as well. But how this is also relevant across disciplines. Yes, obviously we have the global context here, but we also might be thinking about what does this mean just in general for our profession? How are students going to be interacting with others, colleagues or patients or collaborators or consumers of their, products or art or whatever that looks like, and being able to take a position or take a perspective is really relevant even just outside of this as well. So thinking about what that looks like and what that can look like can be really really useful. But then again, obviously, as Tom was just talking about, having both the, understanding of one's own positionality and the analyzing makes it, just a little bit complex, but also a great opportunity.
Yeah, great points. Trisha, yeah, could you forward? And so there's maybe just a couple of caveats on honestly, some things I've already mentioned, right? Grade assignments, we can have all kinds of grade assignments. So I think one maybe unstated thing in this slide is that as we're thinking about assessment, it's really not thinking about it's really focused on student learning. So the assignments, we can create great assignments, and those assignments can have students do all kinds of interesting things, but what we're really hoping is that they do give students an opportunity to really meet the outcome, right? And so there are a couple of ways in which that may not happen, even though we might have really interesting, fun assignments, right? And so that could be right when you're not addressing all parts of the outcome through your assignment, or maybe you're assuming a competency will be demonstrated, um, when you're asking students to do a certain kind of activity, like analysis, when the outcome asks for description, right? They might do description, but in order to really ensure that students are demonstrating their competency or abilities relative to the outcome, we need to specifically ask and prompt them to do that. So we'll shift now into a little bit of a kind of an activity for you all to think through. So Trisha, if you could forward, yeah. So the questions that I gave you all just a few slides ago to kind of think about, whether assignments align effectively with outcomes, are sort of listed here on this left-hand column. And we're going to use those with these sort of fictional assignments that you see in the middle and right-hand column in this, I don't know what colors these are, teal and salmon or something. And so what we've done is we've pulled two of the outcomes from this category, right? SLO1, which we just talked through, and SLO3, both of which we just talked through. And so what we're going to ask you all to do, first individually and then in conversation with a couple of peers, is to kind of just run through one of these SLOs and the sort of fictionalized assignment and course context. We're not picking on FABs or NAIS at all here. We're just trying to create a little bit of a context for conversation. So for example, I might be interested in SLO3, right? I really want to spend a little bit of time thinking about positionality. So I'm going to kind of reflect on this outcome. What does it mean? And then take a look at these. Yes, these courses are totally made up. Take a look at this very brief assignment description, lacking a lot of details, of course, but kind of trying to think about, does this assignment give students the best opportunity or an opportunity to achieve what this outcome is asking students to achieve, right? So it's a take-home midterm exam with a question on describing one community's global challenges, right? Does that give all students an opportunity to demonstrate their learning? Does it give does it make evidence of their learning documentable, right? And so just kind of working through these questions to really come up with an answer of, yes, this one does align, or maybe it kind of aligns, or no, it does not align, it doesn't meet anything. So I think Trisha or one of us will put you into some small groups. Again, just take a minute or two to kind of think on your own, and then we'll have a smaller group. Then you can, discuss your thoughts in your small groups before we come back for a whole group discussion. And maybe we'll do this for about, let's see, 8 to 10 minutes, we'll say. Questions before we break? And actually, let me share, because we have a handout that helps guide this a little bit. And you will see that you'll see this activity, I think, on page 2.
And I'm going to go ahead and pause this recording. So if you are watching this back, we will probably pick up the recording after this activity. So you're welcome to brainstorm these things, think about how your own assignment aligns, but the second half of our recording is going to be about the logistics of assessment. So please stick around, but just so you know, we're just going to pause that for right here and then pick up in a minute. All right.
Yeah, just a couple of reminders or recaps of what we were just going through, right? So in each of the courses, you really want to have one assignment that is assessing each outcome. You can have one assignment assess multiple outcomes, but I think as we're kind of talking about these outcomes, it might be challenging to do all of them within one assignment. And you really want to make sure that you're asking students to explicitly demonstrate their achievement relative to the outcome. A great resource that we have on our campus that you might consider if you've not participated in our transparent assignment design. We have a sort of a 60-minute workshop, and then we have a more extended series that really delves into it as a practice for assignment design. Very, very, very helpful. And then finally, a lot of you are in leadership roles within your department, so phone a friend and make sure everybody is aware of sort of the needs and the resources that we've made available and some of the conversations that we've had today.
Hey, in this section, we're going to talk through some next steps. And to start off, here is a visual depicting an overview of what to expect for this fall. If you are going to be teaching a course in the fall and the spring semester, the sequence will be roughly the same, but I'm going to go over starting from the beginning of the semester. So in August 2026, you will receive a Welcome to Mason Core email that will be coming from Laura and Trisha. And so in that email that details all the different expectations around the Mason Core course, welcome to the semester, and lots of wonderful resources. And in that email, there'll be a little blurb about assessment. And then a heads up that you will be getting another email from me. So then shortly after that email goes out and we give you a chance to settle in, I will do a follow-up email with some specifics about the submission workshop that will be coming. So the submission workshop will typically take place about a month or so into the semester. The submission workshop will be recorded just in case you're not able to make it. All of the materials will be shared with all instructors who are participating in assessment, as well as posted on our website. So the submission workshop, once again, that'll take place in probably most likely like the second, third week of September. So be on the lookout for that. And at that time, I will walk through more specifics about how to submit. If this is something you've done before, it's pretty similar process, but if it's new to you, we will walk through in detail what to expect. The assessment artifacts are submitted through a individual unique Qualtrics link. So each instructor will receive a unique Qualtrics email with a link, and then in the body of that email, there will be a list of 3 randomly generated student G numbers, as well as a list of 3, if there are at least 6 students in your class, 3 more alternate G numbers, just in case one of the 3 don't end up submitting their assignment. Sometimes that happens, or they end up leaving. And usually that email will come to you a little bit later in the semester. And sometimes we have instructors who are really eager to start submitting, but we do ask if that you kind of let the semester go a little bit, so that way everyone's in a nice rhythm. But also we do need, from a logistical standpoint, we do need to wait, because it's usually after the add drop period ends, that's when we have our official census files in our office, and that's when we can generate the G numbers, because before that we do have students dropping the course, and so that would be a lot to try to go back, and so we just want to make sure it's sort of as final as possible. But again, if anything changes after that point, we do have the alternate list that you can refer to if needed. So in the Qualtrics email invitation, it will be addressed to you personally. Again, if you have multiple sections, each section will be receiving their own individual email. Sometimes we have unique situations where somebody's co-teaching or something like that. Someone can certainly submit on your behalf. You would have to forward them that email, but then whoever is listed as the primary instructor of record will be the one that will be receiving the email. And due to the very large volume, typically we have at least 3 categories going through data collection. We're not able to change that. So again, if you're in a situation where somebody else is supporting you with that, that's no problem. If you are not sure, you're welcome to reach out to me. I'm always happy to help. And I can say, no problem, you can forward it to that person. But again, it is the primary instructor of record who is the who's recorded. And then just to clarify, we don't share any individual information on instructors or anything like that for any of our reports. We have that information just in case, again, if we need to reach out to somebody to clarify something and really to have our lists accurate. And then the submission materials are typically due. We've kind of adjusted it so that now it's about like a week after the last day of class in any given semester. And I am always willing to work with you, and that if sometimes you have an assignment or something like that, really right up until that deadline, please just shoot me an email, send me an email, and I'll take note of it that you're going to be submitting a few days late, and that is something we're very happy to accommodate and work with you all. But for the most part, we highly, strongly appreciate, encourage you to send those materials in on time. It doesn't have to be a final end of term type of assignment. Again, like low stakes, does not need to be graded. As long as it has evidence of the student learning, sometimes it might not because it's the student, and that's okay too, because that's not a reflection necessarily of the instruction, right? And so we do want to be able to really get a good sense of how students are performing so that we can make any necessary improvements. If for some reason you're not able to submit something for whatever reason it might be, send me an email, like let's figure something out, because I've had situations where people have typed in like I can't submit anything and then uploaded that, and then we don't end up seeing that for a little while. So like we typically have over 2,000 artifacts that we're sifting through, so then we're not able to use that artifact. So again, if you do run into a situation where you're just not sure what you can do, reach out to us and we're happy to help. And then as mentioned, we're going to do this data collection both in the fall and the spring. And if you teach both semesters, you will submit both semesters. We want representative sample. And so again, it's 3 samples. Sometimes you have a small section, sometimes you have a very large section. But for just the volume of the sections that we're dealing with, we're asking for 3. And so again, if you teach again in the spring, please plan on submitting again in the spring. The form that we have for you all, hopefully you'll find it relatively simple and easy to navigate, because we really tried to streamline it and make it just a couple uploads, a brief description. But again, like all of that information is on our website, and we'll go through that in more detail at our upcoming submission workshop. I think for now, like focusing on the assignment and that piece is where we'd like for you to spend your energies and of course enjoy your summer. And then in the fall 2027 semester next year, towards the end of that semester, we'll do the ratings, and that's when we'll be reaching out to subject matter experts like yourself to come join us. And so just keep that in mind for future. And I think Laura, you might have something to add. Yeah, I think this was me as well. They're just kind of like next steps for you all. That you have the class that you're going to teach. Think about the assignment prompt. Hopefully this has started, some ideas for you. And then in the fall semester, you will upload the 3 randomly assigned students. We can go to the next slide.
I think this one's mine. So really just thinking about how you can support not only if you're a faculty member, how you can kind of start thinking about this on your own, but if you are a coordinator, whether it's a course coordinator or a unit coordinator who's joining us, really be thinking about how you can support these assessment efforts and support your teaching faculty and instructors. So first question you really want to think about is how can you help us ensure that faculty are contacted and engaged and supported? So this includes your continuing faculty, possibly those of you that are on the call right now, but it also includes your adjuncts, any students that you have, GTAs, and then also new faculty. So when people are coming into your unit and teaching these courses, possibly for the first time, we really rely on your support to help make it clear to those instructors what Mason Core is, what is expected of them as a Mason Core instructor, especially including the assessment side. So it's not just about pointing out the outcomes, but what they need to do for assessment. And the fact, again, as we've reiterated that assessment is not a comment on individual instructors. It is a comment on the category, right, as a whole. So we do send a lot of reminders to instructors, both from the Mason Core office and the OIEP office, but we do also rely on those local reminders. So how can you as a unit kind of support all the instructors who are participating in the assessment collection process? And then when we think about these assignments, you do want to start to wonder or to think about ways that you can support faculty in identifying and revising assignments as needed. One of the benefits of Global Context is that it is a new category. So we know that every course that is identified as Global Context has submitted in the past 3 years an assignment map that has clearly aligned assignments in them. So whether or not your unit shares those assignments is a unit by unit choice, but we would recommend, again, you don't have to assign those assignments to instructors. Not every instructor has to teach the same assignments, but we know at least that those assignments map in those documents. So perhaps you find a way to share that out with your group of instructors if it's a large course. If it's a smaller course and you have individual decisions, maybe you just work through with a colleague or work through on your own to make sure that your assignments are aligning. And how you do that is, again, unit by unit. And then just be thinking about ways that your unit can support faculty as we go into the submission part of this is of the assessment. So again, we are going to do a lot on the Mason Core and OIEP side to support, but we also rely on that instructor or unit by unit support as well. And then as we head into the summer, we are around all summer long. So if you need any help, if there's anything that you need clarification on for your unit, if you want us to schedule a time maybe next semester to talk to your unit, right, we are available. And we would love to be helping with that. And we also have support from Stern Center, which the next slide I'm just going to jump to, particularly the Mason Core Instructor Certification Program is a fantastic resource for any instructors that teach regularly in the core. Our next round is actually next week. So if you wanted to sign up, I think it's next week, yeah, in May. There's a couple workshops that you have to do for that. And that's made pretty clear on the website. There's a 2-part HIPS high impact practices workshop, and then it ends with a solving the puzzle piece that Laura does that really just wraps everything up with how do you teach a Mason Core course, right? What are the key aspects of general education that make these courses different than what you expect to do in with your major students, things like that. And so this is a great opportunity. We talk a lot about assignment alignment in those workshops. It's a great opportunity to really support your instruction, and we just would love to see you all there. And we'll be starting our advanced level in the fall, which we're very excited about. More information on that to come. And yeah, and this you'll get a copy of these slides as well, so you'll have all these links, but we try to make it very clear and make it very easy for instructors when the submission process comes, and we will share this recording as well. But I think that's a quick wrap up, and I know we're 2 minutes over, but any questions?
May I ask a final question? So, for picking the course, if we give this option to give this choice to instructors, would it be possible for them to choose a low-stake assignment, or you have a preference for more major or high-stake assignments?
It's really the assignment you think maps the best to the outcome. It can be one where they're warming up and learning something, or it can be a higher stakes assignment. It's completely up to you because you know your students and you know your faculty on what you think you want them to do. But the big trick is it just has to map clearly to the learning outcomes.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. All right. I know we are over. I know you guys are busy this time of year, and we truly, truly appreciate you coming and spending some time with us. And we are happy to help you out all the time. Don't fixate and perseverate on it. Just give us a call and let us know how we can help you out. And we're delighted to do that. It'll make it much better process for you. And thank you so much. Great end of the semester to everybody. Hopefully we'll end up well, and it will be a bit of a break coming up soon. Thank you.
Thanks, y'all.